The law of Ouroboros thinking is that different physical laws control on different size scales. And that is why you will never see a little tiny ambulance like that. Every object, every event, every creature can only be the size that it actually is because each thing has its location on the cosmic Ouroboros. Scale models can never work like the real thing. Here's another example. So Hollywood does not pay any attention to this kind of thing. So they totally ignored it. Here what they did in the King Kong movie, the more recent one, was that all they did was put a normal-looking gorilla in front of a miniaturized set. But in fact, if King Kong were really 5 times the height of a normal gorilla, he would have to be a different shape. He'd have to be hugely bulked up to support his additional weight. He would have looked much more terrifying, but they blew it, and they did not, they didn't exploit this principle. The law of Ouroboros thinking is a universal law, and that means it applies to everything, including us. Huge differences in scale exist not only in the sizes of objects, but in the complexity of human interactions. Example. Have you ever wondered why individual people can be kind and generous and wise, but you put them together into a committee, and the committee is never kind, generous, or wise? Even if most of the individuals who make the committee up are. And if you look at a giant collective like a corporation or a government, well, these are even further removed from humans. I remember in the early part of the recession, 2008, there was a headline in the New York Times that read, "Have banks no shame?" And the answer is no. Banks can't feel shame. Banks are not human, and shame is a human emotion. And something that is more complicated, higher up on the Ouroboros, cannot behave like a human being because it's not a human being, even though it's made of human beings. Corporations are not people. Yeah. So this becomes very, very clear if we look at it in reverse. So every one of us is made of elementary particles. But we don't behave anything like elementary particles because with increasing complexity, new laws come into play and the characteristics of elementary particles essentially disappear. Now, when people mix up size scales, when they think that the way that something works on one size scale can automatically be true for something on a completely different size scale, Joel and I call that scale confusion, and it is rampant in the metaphors that are being used today, especially in politics. For example, I'm sure you're all aware there have been many current demands to protect the religious beliefs of organizations, including churches. But this is actually scale confusion because organizations don't have beliefs, they have policies. It doesn't matter if they're religious organizations because they have no beliefs. They have no feelings, and they cannot be offended. The only thing that can be offended is individual humans. Now, scale confusion sometimes is cluelessness, but sometimes it's sophistry, and it's really important to know the difference. Now, can cosmic consciousness help us to be happier? Well, I have known several people who told me that they didn't want to have children because they didn't want to bring them into such a messed up world. I even had one friend who was contemplating suicide because she had worked for several years, many, many years actually, for environmental causes, and she was starting to feel that it was completely hopeless. People like this are really suffering, but what are they suffering from? What I think is, it is emotional scale confusion. We all evolved in small tribes, and our distant ancestors felt emotions about the people that they knew and interacted with. But today, we are inundated with the news of everything wrong in the entire world. So now, as we are learning to think on more than one size scale with this new kind of cosmic consciousness, what we also need to learn to do is to feel consciously, differently on different size scales. Our feelings do not have to be the same across all size scales. The laws of nature are not the same across all size scales. Navigating between the political and the personal is a spiritual act for any human who is trying to live consciously in a meaningful universe. The seriousness of the overall world situation does not at all require that we be serious all the time, especially not on the personal level. Demoralization because of the world situation is emotional scale confusion. Our job as individuals is to live with joy while doing everything we possibly can to improve the odds for our descendants and for our planet. Joy increases our motivation. Our best hope is energized and not demoralized people, vigorously and creatively attacking large-scale problems, but guiltlessly living fun, loving lives on the small scale. And this is true. And this has to be true whether we succeed or not. My favorite quote is from Emma Goldman, who said, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution."